All right, people, let's get into it. I am Garrett, and in this video, we are going to be looking at Greyjoy's newest anamorphic lens, the 35mm. Today's video is a little different than what we normally do. We are going to be looking at this, which is Greyjoy's newest lens in their anamorphic lineup. This is the 35mm 1.8 times anamorphic lens. Now, if this sounds familiar, that's because we've already looked at the 50mm lens in this set. If you haven't seen that video yet, there's a link up over there to that. So instead of just looking at one lens on its own and giving a review of this, I want to do something a little different today. I want to look at this lens in comparison to the 50. Because as every filmmaker knows, when you're building out a lens set, it's important to know how one lens works with or doesn't work with the other lenses in that set. Without further ado, we're looking at the 35 compared to the 50. On the surface, they look quite similar, and this is very good for a set of lenses. They're the same height. They both have the same front diameter, which is an 82mm thread on the inside with an 85mm exterior, meaning that you can use a lot of the same accessories, and you don't have to worry about changing your follow focus position or the rest of your fizz system if you're using one. They both have a lens support mount here, which is very important. Both of these lenses are quite heavy, each of them being right around that 2.5 pound range. So this is super important, especially if you're using a mount that isn't PL, which would not be a locking mount. So if you're using any of the mirrorless mounts or the EF mounts, this is extremely important because you don't want to put all of this weight and tension directly on the mount of the camera. That would look something like this. So this would then screw directly onto the base of our lens like this. And then this would mount onto your 15mm rods, meaning that you're taking a ton of the weight off of the mount itself, making it a lot easier to pull our focus. The other thing, when you don't have it mounted like this with a heavy lens, when you're using a follow focus, when you get to the ends of your follow focus, or you change directions of your focus pull, it can give you play within the lens. Which is where these two mount. So you're actually gonna get a little physical play there. So always use a lens support system. Links in the description as always for that. They're both T2.9, not the fastest lenses in the world, but they are both absolutely tack sharp, wide open. When I use these, I would just lock it off at T2.9, never have to worry about shifting that, especially when you look at it in comparison to the T22, which is closing it all the way down. You can see just how nice and pleasing an image it creates. The coating, as far as I am aware, is the same, but all that to say the color rendition between the two lenses is identical, which is great. We're not getting any color casting or shifting between lenses, which is wonderful. With both of these Greyjoys, there's not a ton of character. They're both pretty neutral, right? I would say that they cast a little warmer than cooler, which is preferred in terms of color rendition, but you're not getting a lot of distinct characteristics within this lens, outside of the fact that you're getting some of that oval bokeh, you're getting some of that really interesting depth of field play that you get, in addition to that 2:4 aspect ratio. This is basically, for all intents and purposes, a full frame lens. There is some sensor coverage things. Make sure that your sensor is compatible in terms of coverage with this. I shot everything with the Red Komodo, which is a great Super 35 sensor, so I had no issues whatsoever. And the Red Komodo is able to shoot in 4:3 1.8 times anamorphic natively, meaning I don't have to do any jostling around in post to get it look how I want it to look. The 35 has a 240-degree focal throw, so still quite long. And like with the 50, we have metric on one side and imperial on the other. But that is about where the similarities between these two lenses, the 50 and the 35, end. The rest of it is going to be somewhat different, and some of these things I like, and some are a little interesting. Couple of things that are different with the 35 than the 50. The first is if you order it in the PL version, it also comes with the additional EF mount as well as shims and screws to be able to swap out that mount as you want. So this is the original PL mount that shipped with the lens. I then was able to swap out and put an EF mount on it. If you are going to be doing mount swaps on your own, totally fine. It's great that they have made that user friendly, but it is important to make sure that you utilize the shims that come with it. They are these little super thin, almost like washers that kind of go between the mount and the lens itself. And the reason we use those is so that way we can make sure that we're getting accurate focus readouts from our lens in the way that the lens behaves. So make sure that you use a focus chart, make sure that you mount it, you go through, check, make sure your distances are right, and then attach it permanently. Not that big of a deal, but something that you should take the extra step to do if you are going to be swapping those mounts out. It also does come with this soft bag. I put all of my lenses in hard cases, but if you didn't have one, it does come with kind of this like velvety-ish soft bag here. It says Great Joy on it. Very cool. Bringing back this 50 in here, one of the things that is quite different between these two lenses is that the 50mm, which we've already looked at, is a front anamorphic lens, where the 35 appears to be a rear anamorphic lens. What I mean by that is if we look at the fronts of this, see how the 50 is a cylindrical front, right? We have that kind of square element, and the 35 is a spherical front. Looks much more like a traditional or normal lens. I would imagine they've done this because of the field of view difference between the two. It's not bad, it's not wrong, it's fine, but it is quite different. So if we look at the backs of these here, you'll see that the 50mm has a spherical element and the 35mm has a cylindrical element. Now, the other interesting thing about this element here is not only is it cylindrical on the back, but it is both concave as well as being horizontal, where the front element here is both convex and vertical. I don't know exactly how or why they have done it that way. If you look down the barrel of this lens here, I don't know if you'll be able to catch it in the light. If you can, you'll see that there are other cylindrical elements within this lens, but it is just a very interesting way of doing anamorphic between the two lenses of the same set. One of the areas that this lens absolutely shines is in its focus breathing. In the 50mm, when we were looking at it, we talked about the fact that this was a synchro focus design, meaning that the squeeze factor shifts throughout the focal range of this lens. That is not the case with this. This is constant throughout, meaning that you're not going to be getting any squeezing or de-squeezing happening through the focal range. That said, the breathing in this lens is almost unnoticeable. It is not distracting in any way. It is quite pleasing through the range, especially when you compare it to the entire range of the 50. That's where you really start to see how that squeeze and de-squeeze works and how much attention it draws through that focal range. But because this is a 35mm and this is anamorphic, the field of view difference between this lens and this lens is absolutely massive. And then if I was to move the 35 closer to get this same general positioning as my 50mm, you can see again just how absolutely wide that field of view is in the same relative positioning. In fact, if you look at what the 50mm is, when we start to extend out that horizontal field of view with the 35, you can see just how much wider you're getting with this. I like that the 50 was the first. I think that the 35 is a perfect complement to it. I think that this is going to be a fantastic lens set, and for the price, it's really, really hard to beat. This lens is gonna retail for $1,700 American, but if you go on their Indiegogo campaign and pre-order it there, you will get a discount somewhere between 10 to 15%, depending on when you sign up for that. So you can save yourself some cash, Go get that early if you want to. They are, again, going to be adding more lenses to this lineup. I know that the 85mm is next. I'm very interested in looking at that. And once we have kind of a more complete set there, I would love to actually shoot a short with this and kind of trade out the lenses one for another to really see how each one plays. Because as any filmmaker should know, you don't choose the focal length of the lens based on the shot type. That's nonsense. You don't need a wide lens for a wide shot. You don't need a long lens for a tight shot. We choose the focal length based on the tone and the emotion and the feeling that we're trying to go for as storytellers and filmmakers. The reason why a lens set works, the reason why we have multiple lenses within a set, is to make decisions on how we want the shot composition to feel. And that determines the lens that we put on it. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, do me a favor, give this a like. Also, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. We're doing lots of cool stuff. When the next lens comes out, if they decide that they want to send me one, I'll shoot a short with it, so that way we can see what all three lenses do and how different they each are in a short film or narrative application. And as always, I'll see you in the next episode.